Welcome to Safe Team Solutions. My name is Gabriel, Safety Consultant at Safe Team Solutions.
Hi, my name is Mike, Senior Safety Consultant with Safe Team Solutions. We have two very special guests with us today that have extensive experience in human resources and employment law to answer questions pertaining to vaccinations for the current pandemic and the legal repercussions pertaining to this very timely topic. Our guests are Ken Barge, the owner and president of EGRAB Services, which provides assistance with all aspects of human resources. His contact information is on the screen, as well as the website. And Hillary Kramer Lynch, Senior Counsel with Platt, Cheema, Richmond, PLLC, which provides legal assistance with employment law and a plethora of other legal help. Her contact information and website are also on the screen. Without further ado, we present Ken and Hillary.
Hillary, the question is, how do organizations handle vaccines during a pandemic? That's one of the challenges I think many organizations have, whether you are a large organization or a small organization. From a legal standpoint, what are your thoughts? How should organizations handle vaccines? Should they make them mandatory, or should they just look at what the employees want to do? What are your thoughts?
That's a really great question. As a lawyer, I am counseling my clients on what are the legal minimum thresholds and what types of pitfalls do you need to watch out for so that you are in compliance with certain statutes. And those change by state. There are mostly federal statutes, but when we're thinking about the pandemic, there are different rules in each state. So I'm here to provide some information and guidance related to what there are with respect to the legal minimum threshold. But I also rely on folks like Ken to answer the human side. What's best for your company culturally? What is best for your employees? And then it's up to the employer to make the choice. Are you going to stick with the minimum? You're going to do more. And sometimes when you do more, you add value. And that's something you can rely on Ken for consulting for human resources and providing a lot more of the human side on guidance. With respect to the legal issues related to requiring or making it mandatory for vaccinations of your employees, I would advise not to do it unless you are a big company that you can take on that heavy lift of training your employees, whether or not you're a big company with industrial hygiene physicians and nurses to conduct the inoculations, and then at the same time make sure that you are not sidestepping either the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, or GINA, which is the Genetic Information Non-Disclosure Act. That both of those acts really prevent an employer from asking specific disability type questions, which are generally going to be asked whether or not you're eligible to get the vaccine. So in those circumstances, it would be a very heavy lift for an employer to conduct vaccinations in-house. If the employer would want to use a third party, that would be a preferable, easier route. But then I'd ask also, Ken, do you have some guidance for employers on how they should determine what really is the best course of conduct for their employees based upon their own personal feelings about the vaccination?
That's when it becomes a little bit of a challenge, because you're in the process of protecting your employees. You want to protect your employees' families. You want to protect your clients. You want to protect your customers. But again, you don't want to overstep and step on the rights that an employee has. So it really all depends on the organization and what is that organization doing. What I mean by that, what type of impact is that, or what type of option does that employee have with the general public, with other individuals? So, for instance, if you're in the healthcare industry, yes, it's probably a good solution to consider to make it mandatory for vaccination. However, there may be other industries where it's not necessarily the requirement where it should be mandatory. But again, it's really hard to give a yes, no question to an organizational type situation like that, because each organization is a little bit different. Now, I did want to, however, talk about one thing I wanted to make sure that our listeners understand is that when you were discussing the vaccination, it's not that whether or not an employer should make it mandatory, it's whether or not they should take on the burden of actually performing the vaccinations on their particular job site. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's really a two-part analysis when you're looking at, as an employer, do you have people that could administer the vaccination, such as a big company with physicians and nurses? Are you going to be able to do it in a way that, for example, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccinations require that they be kept at a certain temperature? So are you going to be able to do that physically? Secondly, are you going to be able to administer the vaccination in a way that would not be discriminatory?
Yeah.
Are you going to be asking your employees, which you would be if they're eligible, and if the eligibility is based upon certain underlying conditions, many of those questions are not questions an employer can ask of an employee. Now, you can encourage your employees to go when it's their turn, but whether or not it is their turn or not is a question that could create a potential legal issue as far as you diving into an employee's medical background.
Yeah, I think one other thing to keep in mind is that an organization is, even if we were to make that mandatory, there are certain exemptions that an employee may have rights to that would allow them still not to take that vaccination. So, it's really important whenever you are making any particular item in your company mandatory that you still have to comply with. You don't want to ever be discriminated, ever looked upon as discriminatory as it relates to your employees. But I think that's really another key thing to keep in mind. But one other option on this particular topic, what about the individual? Maybe they don't have an exemption that they're eligible for, but let's say they just don't want to take the vaccination. They don't want to take it for whatever reason. They decide they don't want to take it, but it's mandatory for your business. I think that those are really the challenging questions that organizations are going to have to handle. From a legal standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, I think it's real important to look at where your corporate company culture is, and then decide what's going to be the best for your company. And then at times, can you make accommodations for that employee? For instance, if you are a organization that allows your employees to work from home, everyone's working remote right now. And if this employee does not want to take the vaccination for whatever particular reason, and that person can effectively do their job from a alternative location or possibly from home, problem solved. You may be able to accommodate the employee as well as accommodate the employees that make it mandatory. But what about the employee that can't work from home, or that can't make that, the employer cannot make that accommodation? What about that from a legal standpoint? Are there some issues that we need to be aware of for that employee that says, I don't want to do it, but you still want them to take the vaccination? How do you handle that from a legal standpoint?
Absolutely, Ken. I think that you bring up a great point. And I think that when you come in to help a company make that decision, you're really helping them add value to a culture where you want to both keep your employees feeling safe feeling
Right.
that they can come to work and they are in an environment mostly where at least all the other employees have been encouraged to get the vaccination or been given the opportunity to. And so that makes you feel more comfortable going to the office, makes you feel comfortable as an employee that your employer cares about you. But on the other hand, do you want to be so big brother about it to require and be mandatory about someone going? However, if you have made accommodations to your employees to work from home and they feel safe at home, do you need to necessarily make them get the vaccination? Then I think that there's more than one way to be able to create that culture of feeling safe, right? So if it's something, for example, in the transportation industry, where maybe you have dispatch callers that are now able to work from home, you could give them that, accommodation to make them feel safe working from home. Separately, if you have drivers out in the field where you want them to feel safe going from place to place, you should give them the opportunity to be able to take time off from work and maybe follow in the shoes of some other bigger companies, grocery stores and other box stores that have come out to publicly announce giving employees time off and paying them a couple hours to go get their vaccinations. You could do that with some of your transportation drivers. But if they feel comfortable moving about the country and following certain safety procedures because they have different ideological responses to the vaccination or maybe other health concerns, I think what's missing here is whether you're listening to the employee.
Correct.
And how can you make it a employee and employer mutually driven decision? And I would, if I were in-house in human resources, I think I'd reach out to you, Ken, and I'd ask you if you'd be able to help me come up with a survey or questions. Maybe I want to see initially what the reaction would be if I had two different options. Would you be able to help me do something like that, or what would that look like?
Yeah, I think that ultimately developing a survey and understanding, one of the things I try to listen to, Stephen Covey came up with a 7 habits of highly effective people, but one of them is seek to understand before being understood. And so often, as you mentioned about being big brother, we want to just implement and throw things onto employees and to our teams, but we don't understand the impact that can have on the team. So surveys are a great way to do that, whether formal or informal surveys. It's a good way to do that. But again, when an organization tries to understand the culture of their company, explains the culture of that company, and lives the culture of the company, I think ultimately you're going to make the decisions that's going to be the best for the company and to allow that company to be healthy and to be able to strive. I think that's ultimately what you want to look at doing. So I guess really in a nutshell, what we're looking at is that there is no easy yes, no question answer to this question, but I believe that if you take a few minutes and sit back and evaluate and try to understand what the impact of making a vaccination or something else mandatory for your employees, before you make that step, think about the impact that you have. Now, some organizations may not have a choice and they may have to move forward with that mandatory vaccination. But if you do, I think it's good to at least get some type of input and maybe reach out to others to see if we can provide some clear counsel or advice as it relates to developing the strategy that's going to best fit your organization, whether you are small, 4, 3, 4, 2 employees, all the way up to Fortune 500. We're here to help and be a resource for you.
Can a company give a bonus or other incentives to an employee or contractor who gets the vaccine?
That's a very good question. Can an organization, some organizations may want to look at providing an incentive for an organization, for their employees, for taking the vaccine. And actually, there was an article written recently where it was a Fortune 500 Dollar General, I believe, actually gave their employees, and I think there was another
Aldi.
Aldi also gave their employees a incentive, time off to be able to go and take the vaccination. I think that also helps as it relates to, because especially you don't want employees missing time or thinking that they have busy lives, they have kids, or they have other responsibilities. And so you don't want them to feel like they have to take away time from work and lose maybe that income. So I think it was really a good incentive or a good morale booster from Dollar General and Aldi for offering that type of incentive for their employees. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think that is initially a good course of action right now when the vaccination is not available to the general public. When you're still waiting for your turn and you could potentially violate the ADA or GINA when you're asking your employees if they're eligible for the vaccination, and if they are, why are they not deciding to actually vaccination? But right now, if you are incentivizing, if you're encouraging your employees to do it by making sure you're making it more convenient for them to take off time. Another thing that I might suggest is, if you're an employer and you're listening, there are times, because the vaccination is not widely available, to give your employees the ability to be tardy, to call in late, or to leave early when they know that there's a vaccination available for them and they can't necessarily plan ahead. Many employers have, dependability policies or attendance policies. I would suggest also including more leniency when it comes to an employee asking off for work or coming in late or leaving for a period of time during the day to go get their vaccination. Do not have points counted against them for doing that, only because of right now it is difficult to find a place to go, and then very difficult to plan ahead sometimes when all of these providers either may not have them available. So that is one extra accommodation that could really encourage and incentivize your employees to do that right now. As things change and the vaccination becomes more widely available to the general public, and potentially when the Johnson & Johnson vaccination comes out and it's more easily administered, then you can change your policy. But, my final point on this would be, whatever policy you do have, it should be written and it should be dispersed to your employees, and it should be uniformly in place and implemented. That's always, standard practice when you're in HR, to make sure there's no special exceptions or certain things that could seem discriminatory against others. So it is advisable to have your policy written and notify your employees of that.
Well, the one thing I like about what you said is that you actually put the human resources. Oftentimes when organizations are looking, I have this employee that's going to be tardy, or this employee has to leave a little bit early. At certain times, I think it is important that if there's an opportunity for that employee, whether it's a vaccination or maybe something else that might be important to them, to be human. And there's a reason why it's called human resources. And so be human when it comes to being an employer and allowing employees to have a good work-life balance.
What is a solution for an interstate trucking company which has a driver who does not want to be vaccinated and refuses to travel in states with high infection rates?
So understanding that if you have someone that does not want to actually take a vaccination for whatever reason, but then they want to be cautious in regards to putting themselves in a position where there could be a high infection rate within a specific group. Again, that's another one of those challenging questions. And, really, some of that's going to look at what is that individual's job. And I'll give you an example. If you have a driver, for instance, who's driving a route, and let's say he has to go from state A to state B, and let's say state B, their rate has been much higher than the state that individual came from. That individual does not want to go into that particular state. However, they also don't want to take the vaccination. I think one thing to keep in mind, and I don't want to overstep in this bounds here, is that the vaccination is being utilized as a an option for individuals to prevent them from receiving or being contagious for any type of pandemic or any type of issue. Like for instance, when it comes to the flu, there might be situations where someone might take a flu shot and to try to allow them not to get be contagious or to actually become infected with the flu. But I think in many aspects here, I would want to look at what that individual's job is. Is there a way to make an accommodation for that employee? And if I can, as an employer, I would try to make an accommodation for that employee. Do they have the appropriate PPE? When you look at CDC guidelines, there are certain pieces that would allow you, if you have social distancing, if you wash your hands, if you have a mask. There even are certain circumstances where you have to even have additional PPE, where you have some have a full body suit. Now, I'm not saying that you want a driver driving in a full body suit. That's not my answer to the question. But what I would encourage you is that be sure to understand what that driver's role is and what their job requirements are. Secondly, what accommodations can I make for that employee? And then provide the accommodations for that particular employee. What are some additional items you might want to consider for that, Heather?
Yeah, I agree. You would want to, as Ken discussed, engage that employee in an interactive process where there may be questions about why that employee is asking for that accommodation. Is it based on a disability?
Yeah.
And as a reminder to employees, it doesn't necessarily always have to be the accommodation the employee asks. Or you can always have a creative solution of, another way to do it. Can you reroute that employee to go through different states? Can you provide that employee maybe with a truck that they would not have to have an overnight accommodation or be required to really have a pit stop anywhere? And there's a number of creative solutions to that requested accommodation. But again, it has to be based on a disability. So if it really just is the employee asking not to go through a state because they think that there's a high rate and they don't have a disability to really support that accommodation, then that's something you need to find out in that interactive process with the employee. Yeah. So that's always, something that's based on, case by case basis that you can't necessarily come up with right away.
We want to thank Ken and Hillary again for being our special guests today. We'll provide their contact information in the description of this video for anyone who wishes to find out more about the services they provide. Thanks for watching our video. Don't forget to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Remember to share with your friends and colleagues and leave comments.